this moment. There was something you really wanted, and your parents said those magical words that if you want it, you can buy it as long as you buy it with your own money. Anybody hear that? That was awesome. Benjamin had a very similar experience to the story that I'm going to share. I grew up with an Atari. Anybody here ever remember the Atari? Okay. Now we're dating ourselves. I'm in 26 or 52. The original. The original Atari, I believe it was. So I'm in good company here. I remember playing the Atari as a kid, and what I loved about that game, it was really simple. One button, one joystick, and if you played World Series baseball and timed the pitch just right and pressed down as you swung the bat, you can hit a home run every single time. So we had baseball scores that looked like football games. It was a lot of fun. But then as I experienced video games with my other friends, they didn't have Ataris. They had things like Nintendo and Mario, and I tried playing with them, but there was one problem. I wasn't any good, right? And to make matters worse, I was one of those full-body experience gamers. So when I played Mario, I thought that somehow, if I did this, it would help jump, right? It would help the Mario make the jumps and complete it. And it was just an embarrassment, right? I got laughed at, made fun of, and so I thought, Mom, I really need some sort of video game system other than the Atari, okay? I need to get over my jumping thing that I got going on. And kids, you have to realize that this was in the day before Xbox Connect or Wii Sports or those things that track your movements. So this was not cool at all. And so we're walking through Walmart, and I saw that they had the Sega Genesis and these special packages, and the games were on sale. And she told me if you wanted it, you could buy it as long as you use your own money. And so it was winter time, so what can a kid do? I started shoveling snow, I started blowing snow, I started doing any odd and end jobs. Like I went to the funeral home and cleaned out the cobwebs in the basement. Talk about like a creepy job, or helping move like these caskets. And I'm wondering as a kid, like, are there bodies in here? Are they gonna jump out? But I did whatever I could to earn that money. And finally the day came when I went to Walmart and I put my cold hard cash, literally, because I was shoveling snow, on the counter, and I used every penny, and I was ready to buy the Sega Genesis. Like, okay, the cool one, the Sonic is gone. The one with Mortal Kombat, I think that was sold out, and I don't think my mom would have let me buy Mortal Kombat at that time if she would have realized what was in it. And so I got the Sega Genesis that came with Wimbledon and Greatest Heavyweights. Now, I'm not much of a tennis fan. I'm sorry, Cheryl. I'm not really much of a tennis fan. I tried it a few times. It was kind of cool, but boxing, that was a sport that I could relate to. In fact, it's one of the exercises when my back is not giving me problems that I enjoy doing. And so I was hooked on Greatest Heavyweights. And it was my favorite game, and it probably still is my favorite game because it's the very first game that I figured out how to conquer. It's like I figured out the algorithm that the computer programmers had put in there, and I knew exactly what to do, how to beat the game. And so I love it. Still to this day, it's kind of my favorite game. But there was one boxer that always gave me grief. A man by the name of Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali, if you've ever have seen Muhammad Ali fight, if you've gone back on YouTube, or maybe some of you actually had a chance to see the original fights when they aired or listen to them on the radio, you'll understand that he was a brilliant fighter. Now, to be honest, I really didn't care too much for Muhammad Ali. I thought he was kind of arrogant. I didn't like his taunts, and it just didn't seem like a great representation of the sport. But then as I watched his fights and as I understood some of the history and the dynamics of it, I realized that everything he did was like with intention. And so he knew how to break down his opponents. He studied his opponents. He knew how to play them, work them just right. So like when he fought George Foreman, the younger, more talented, athletic fighter who was supposed to crush Muhammad Ali as he was fading, he just leaned back against the ropes and let George Foreman punch himself out. Like literally just gets so tired throwing punches at Muhammad Ali that were doing nothing that late in the fight he was able to turn around and knock him out. I believe he knocked George Foreman out. He ended up winning the fight. There were other tactics that he did that were not so impressive. After he had defeated Sonny Liston, there was an automatic rematch clause in there, I think it was, if I remember the story correctly. It's been a few years since I've looked into this. But so when the fight was coming up, Muhammad Ali decided not just to call Sonny Liston all kinds of terrible names and to taunt him and all this, but he literally went to his house in the middle of the night and woke him up and made threats and terrorized him and his family. And so if you've ever watched the Muhammad Ali rematch, there's this thing called the Phantom Punch, where I think Muhammad Ali might have landed one punch in the fight, and it was like Sonny Liston remembered what that felt like and said, not again. And so the next time it came close, it doesn't even look like Muhammad Ali touches him, he goes down. And then the count is delayed, and he's trying to get up, and he's like, oh, the count is delayed, and he goes down again. And some people think that Sonny Liston wanted no business with Muhammad Ali. He was defeated before he ever stepped into the ring. Now, the programmers of this game had figured this out about Muhammad Ali, and so they're like, how do we take this wild, unpredictable strategy? How do we figure out this wild, unpredictable taunting and put it in the game? And that became my key to defeating Muhammad Ali. Because I realized the strategy behind what he was doing, and I figured out the rhythm of his taunts, and if I waited for just the right moment, he would give a taunt and I would be able to land an easy hook to the body. And as long as I could survive the onslaughts of the rounds in which he really picked up his game, and it looked like I was about to be knocked out, there was a way to defeat him. I didn't have to just hit panic and shut the machine down halfway through the fight and hopefully thinking somehow I'd escape any damages. There were consequences to doing that. I didn't really avoid a loss or anything like that. But I figured out how to beat him. And one day when I was meeting with my counselor, there was a lot that was going on in my life. And I was feeling pretty overwhelmed by all the different stuff, and it felt like life was throwing punches at me. As if I was in a boxing ring and I didn't know where the next punch was coming from. And as I was talking to my counselor about different coping mechanisms and ways that I could kind of reset, I had mentioned that one of the things I was doing was playing this video game in the evening. And so as we talked about that, he helped me understand what was working for me. That's when he made the connection. Helping me understand that what was helping me in my ability was my ability to anticipate when that next punch was going to come from and where it was going to come from, and understanding the rhythms and the patterns of the fight. And he helped me understand that the same can be true for our lives. Do we anticipate what is coming ahead? Are we able to identify what is up next, or identify the risk and cope ahead? And do we recognize the rhythms and the patterns that we are in? Sometimes it feels like we're in a battle, doesn't it? We don't know when that next punch is going to come. We don't know when the next shoe is going to drop. And maybe you've never stepped foot into a boxing ring, but there are days when it feels like we just take blow after blow after blow, and we wonder how much more we can take. Whether it's from life, whether it's from work, or even a friend, or sometimes a close relationship, like with a spouse, or a partner, or a loved one. And if you have ever felt like giving up, then I want you to know that you are not alone. Today we are talking about cherishing the battle. And no, I'm not talking about beating your opponent to a pulp and almost knocking them out. I'm not talking about celebrating the victories of how you crushed your enemy. But instead, we are talking about how we can recognize the moment we are in, anticipate what is to come, and still find ways to cherish. My therapist helped me understand that one of the things that helped me find success in this boxing game was understanding the rhythms and the patterns of this game. And understanding where we are is crucial for our success. First, when we find ourselves in the midst of the battle, it's important for us to understand what is at stake here, right? What is at stake for us? Are we at risk of losing a close friend? Are we at risk of losing a job, a relationship with our children or a spouse? Or maybe we are putting ourselves at risk. You see, knowing what is at stake helps us choose what kind of action we're going to take. Second, it always helps me to understand what are the contributing factors to this moment, right? What are the contributing factors to the battle that I'm in? I may not always be able to control or change how the other person is treating me, but if I understand where they're coming from, and what might be contributing to their choices, then sometimes it does help me to be a little bit more empathetic to that moment, or to understand how I might be able to diffuse the situations. Sometimes we don't know, and rather than trying to change them, all we can do is look at the things that we bring into the battle. What thoughts or beliefs or assumptions do we bring with us? How have we contributed in the past? How are we contributing in this present moment? Third, we look at what we desire. What are the outcomes or the goals that we are after? And is there a place to build on some common ground here and to get to where we want to be? You see, when we find ourselves in the midst of the battle, if we think of a continuum, we really kind of have two ends of this continuum, two choices we can make. Either we can respond with grace, or we can respond with contempt. It's not exactly an either or, but you kind of get the idea. That's why there's a continuum here. And as I read some select verses from Proverbs 18 here, you can either look at your sermon notes, or you can look, well, actually, I'm going to put the text up here on the screen, so you can't look at that continuum, but I want to think, okay, is this kind of leaning towards grace, or is this part leaning towards contempt? The author of the Proverbs writes in verse 3, when wickedness comes, contempt comes also, and with dishonor comes disgrace. A fool's lips bring strife, and a fool's mouth invites a flogging. How many times have we mouthed off to our parents to experience that one, right? The mouths of fools are their ruin, and their lips are a snare to themselves. The word of a whisperer are like delicious morsels. They go down into the inner parts of the body. Before destruction, one's heart is haughty, but humility goes before honor. If one gives answer before hearing, it is folly and shame. Ooh, how many times have we wanted to fill in the blanks with our spouses or in a fight, like we know what they're thinking or whatever, we just totally miss it, right? The human spirit will endure sickness, but a broken spirit, who can bear? A gift opens doors. It gives access to the great. The one who states their case first seems right, until the other comes and cross-examines them. How many times have I been ready to punish one kid only to hear the rest of the story? There's some details that might have been missed. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits. Some friends play at friendship, but a true friend sticks closer than one's sibling. You see, the way we respond matters, doesn't it? Will we respond with grace, which can bring life and be life-giving and open up doors, as the Proverbs say? Or will we respond with contempt, bringing the relationship to an end or putting it at risk? Relationship expert Dr. John Gottman believes that contempt is the greatest predictor of divorce. In fact, he defines contempt as an attitude of superiority, evidenced by speaking down to your partner through name-calling or direct insults. And when we engage in this behavior, their studies found that contempt was the #1 factor that tears couples apart. When we allow this contempt to grow in us. In fact, people who are focused on criticizing their partners, get this, they miss a whopping 50% of the positive things their partner are doing, and they see negativity even when it's not there. Okay, that might be convicting, right? How many times do we get in that spot and we see negativity when it's not there, or we miss the good when it is? But Gary Thomas in his book says, and Cherish says, that cherishing can actually help us conquer contempt. And one of the most potent weapons is thankfulness. Yes, Melissa, that is why when I was in a grumbling mood this weekend, I started trying to list all the things that I could be thankful for instead of grumbling, because I realized I need to practice what I'm about to preach. Yeah, I don't know if it was well done, but it was a work in progress. Gratitude helps us discover good again. even when we don't want to see the good, even when we'd rather grumble. And the person who benefits the most is the one who's expressing it. As I already said, I need to hear that again, because if I'm honest, I have a grumbling problem. When things don't go the way I want them to go, or the way I expected them to go, then I start to grumble. So don't point out the person that you came to church with today and tell them that they have a grumbling problem. Recognize that we have a grumbling problem, right? We all have things that get us grumbling. When our expectations meet disappointments, we grumble. When we are frustrated, we grumble. When things don't go the way we want them to, we grumble. If you have kids, anything can cause you to grumble, right? I can't believe that is so like them. They always, that's just like them, and we can go on and point out all the ways that they have let us down. And you're right, I would probably join you in grumbling in those moments too. It's this terrible spiral. You see, our disappointments lead to frustrations. And our frustrations grow into bitterness, and that bitter root in our hearts sows seeds of contempt. And now as those seeds and as that contempt grow, love fades, and all we feel inside is this burning anger, maybe even hatred. But it's not just a relationship problem, it's a spiritual problem. And spiritual problems need spiritual solutions. And so here's where all these other texts that Pastor Melissa did not give me, but I'm sure she probably found them for herself as well. Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 39 says, "You have heard it said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth." Yeah, let's get even, right? But Jesus says, "But I tell you, do not resist an evil person." Say what? If an evil person slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Oh, I'm not sure about that, Jesus. Sounds painful. Jesus is saying, don't return evil for evil. Don't allow yourself to be pulled down and to stoop down to their level. He goes on to say, you have heard that it was said, love your enemies, or love your neighbors and hate your enemy. All right, Jesus, I'm right there with you. I'll love my neighbors. I'll hate my enemies. But Jesus says, I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Oh, do I have to? That you may be children of your Father in heaven, who causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. And he sends his rain to the righteous and the unrighteous. So if God can do that, and we are God's children made in God's image, can't we do the same? Jesus says, love your enemies, pray for them. And if you really want to get even, if you really want to get them upset, return to Romans chapter 12, where Paul references Proverbs chapter 25. Beginning verse 19, Paul writes, do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. Don't try to settle the score for yourselves. Leave it up to God. God will take care of it. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, Proverbs chapter 25 here says, if your enemy is hungry, feed them. If your enemy is thirsty, give them something to drink. And in doing this, you will heap burning coals on their head. There's your chance to get even. Do good. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Going back to Jesus, Matthew chapter 7, verse 9 says, which of you, if your child asks for bread, would give them a stone? And if they ask for fish, would give them a snake? If you then, though you are evil, though you may struggle, though you are imperfect, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask them? So in everything, do to others as you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. All right, Jesus. We're familiar with these teachings. These Bible verses probably aren't new to us, and yet they're so striking, aren't they? Especially when we reflect on the world that we live in Because we live in a world that keeps score. We live in a world of rewards and punishments. We live in a world that wants to get even, right? But when this shows up in a relationship, it doesn't work out well, right? She points out one of the things that you did wrong. You point out something that she did wrong, and it just goes on and on and on. And it never ends, right? And we get caught up in that death spiral. But in his book, Cherish, Gary Thomas points out that when the world looks at cherishing in marriage, it flows out of our spouse's excellence. So the worldview is like, okay, I will cherish you because you're so excellent. And as long as you are excellent, as long as you are loving, I will return love. Right? But that's not how we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to cherish someone because they are so wonderful. We're supposed to cherish someone because we have a God who is so wonderful. Because what happens when things aren't so wonderful? Does cherishing die? Do we no longer have to cherish someone because, well, they messed up? They messed up one too many times, so it's over. But Christ says no. We keep on cherishing just as we have been cherished. We love because we are loved, and we are loving beings. God created us in His image to love one another. We enter into a relationship with grace because no relationship is perfect without it. You need a reminder this morning? Go ahead and turn to your neighbor and say, hey, guess what? You're not perfect. But that's okay. I love you anyway. All right. Grace breeds life, doesn't it? Have you ever been busted? Like really busted? Like you're kind of afraid to say what it was you got busted because you know that there's going to be some judgment, there's guilt, and there's shame, and we carry all this stuff with us. And that guilt and shame can send us running, right? Like we just don't want to face it, and so rather than dealing with it, rather than looking the person in the eye, we're just going to go hide out for a while until things cool off. But a word of grace lifts the burden and brings life, doesn't it? When someone says, you know what, I still love you, I forgive you. Grace inspires us to do and to be better. It brings out the best. And rather than focusing on the disappointments, cherishing helps bring out the best. Do you find yourself in a battle right now? If you do, don't be surprised. January, February, these are like the toughest months on relationships. In fact, this fall when I was doing work on a relationship series, I looked it up. January is still the #1 month for the number of divorces filed. So it's the most popular month in which couples call it quits. February is one of the most difficult months. It also happens to be one of the months that if you invite a friend to come to church, they are most likely to say yes. So if you've been inviting someone to come in, that's just kind of an aside, they're most likely to check it out during the month of February. There's something about this rhythm and this pattern, right? But hope can be possible. Now I want to preface what I'm about to say with this, that if you find yourself in an extreme situation, if you are in an abusive relationship, if you or someone else is in danger, or if you have been advised to take steps to protect yourself, if you are being taken advantage of, or someone is trying to manipulate you, then there needs to be a different conversation, right? That's a whole nother matter to discuss. But for those of us who have just felt the burdens building, we made it through the stress of the holidays and kind of kicking off the new year. We're just kind of find ourselves struggling. Then I want you to know that hope can still be possible. In his book, Cherish, Gary Thomas shares the story of a couple who had called it quits after several years of difficulty in their marriage. And after the divorce, the man started making some changes in his life. One of those changes is he began to get serious about his faith, and as he took his faith seriously and grew in his faith, his heart changed as he did. reflecting upon this transformation in her father, the different roads that her parents took after their divorce, their daughter shared this. She said, "My mother had lived with my dad through his worst years, but because she quit, she missed out on his best years." When I read that, I thought, how many times do we want to quit in the middle of the worst moment, only to miss out on the best? How many relationships suffer through those worst years only to get frustrated and quit, missing out on what could have been the best years? This might not be true in every relationship or in every situation, but it does encourage us not to give up too soon. If you recently met the perfect person or just got married, I don't know why they call it the honeymoon years or the honeymoon phase. Because I don't know what it was like for you, but I think the day we got home from our honeymoon, Pastor Melissa and I probably had our first fight where we didn't talk to each other for a while. Right? Like the honeymoon years are like terrible. It's this period of trying to figure out how could I marry somebody who doesn't pick up their socks? Or they wash the dishes on the wrong side of the sink, right? Or they don't rinse the dishes before putting them in the dish. I mean, we can go on and on. It's this whole awkward period of adjustment as we try to figure out life with someone else. It's amazing anyone survives those years. And then you add those little smelly ones. They're cute some days. Other days they're screaming and they're crying. You add kids into the mix and you're sleep deprived and you're stressed about finances and you're fighting about all kinds of different things and family traditions and in-laws and money and parenting style and feeling taken for granted because you have to get up in the middle of the night to feed them and they're not, and you're feeling all alone. And it's another miracle we make it through that stage. And so if you've made it through there, congratulations. You've survived toddlerhood, right? And then the kids get older. But older doesn't mean easier, right? It just means busier. Busier. As you're shuffling kids all over the place, and much of your life can be centered around just trying to get kids to where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be there, on the day they are supposed to be there, right? That's a challenge. And then one day, the kids grow up, they move out, they come back, they move out, they come back, and then eventually they're out for good, right? And you're now in this empty nester phase, and you suddenly discover, who are you? We've been so busy focusing on the kids that now we have to discover, who are we as a couple again? And then comes retirement. And retirement is a whole other period of rediscovering our identity as we separate who we are from what we do. And it's this whole other adjustment in life. Do we recognize the rhythm and the pattern of life we are in and how it impacts us? Do we understand what to expect next? Because understanding where we are can help us avoid giving up too soon. Because while each stage of life brings its own set of challenges, we also find new opportunities as well. Opportunities to draw close and to connect. And that is going to be the focus next week with Pastor Melissa, right? The practicalities of cherishing one another. But before we close, I want to share that new life, new hope is possible. Talking about finding hope again, just recently I had gotten a call from a couple that wanted to get married. So I'm talking to them, well, usually I do premarital counseling and kind of work through some of the stuff there. But I knew this couple a little bit. You see, this couple wanted to get married again to each other. And they had been married before, and as life kind of happens, things get busy, things get stressful, you get kids in the mix, and their relationship came to an end. But after a period of separation and trying to figure out how to co-parent together, they realized that they were better together. And after working through some therapy and counseling, they were ready to get married again. I remember a time in which I was counseling a couple of different couples, and it just so happened that I had two couples that wanted to call it quits at the same time. The first couple that I had met with, it was clear that they were just sitting me down to inform me on the decision that they had already made. But there was this other couple, a couple that I had only seen once or twice in church before, and I really didn't know them too well. They came to me we're struggling. One of them might have moved out already. But there was something different about this couple. I could tell that they were interested in listening and learning. And so I met with them for a little bit. They got connected to a counselor, and I shared with them a couple of books. And they approached their separation as a time to cool off, a time to get healthy, a time to work on themselves so they could work on their relationship. They went to counseling, they read books, and you know something? They are still together today. You see, a separation doesn't have to be a bad thing. Sometimes we think a divorce is the only solution, or we think, if we're getting separated, or if they're going to move to a different part of the house, or move out, it's all over, right? But sometimes we need that space so that we can work on ourselves and get healthy so we can fully engage in the relationship again. One of the books that helped me understand this was Gary Chapman's book, Hope for the Separated. It was one of the books that I had shared with this couple. In fact, I liked it so much I bought it twice without realizing it. Apparently he released a more updated version called One More Try. And what I liked about this book and other books really similar is they help us understand that how we can work through this period, how we can work on ourselves, and even when things don't turn out the way we hoped for, even when our relationships, our marriages might ultimately come to an end, how do we rebound in life and be healthy and whole once again? You see, new life, new hope is possible even after that original dream has been crushed. Because you are cherished. No matter what you've been through, no matter what road you have been on, I want you to know that new life, new hope is possible because you have a God who loves you and cherishes you deeply. We know we are imperfect people, loving others imperfectly, but we are on a journey to better love and to cherish just as we have been. So don't let that contempt steal your heart. Don't let that bitterness grow inside of you. Don't call it quits before it's time. Cherish the battle. Bring out the best. Let us pray. God, we confess that we are human beings who struggle in this life to live the love that you have shared with us. There are days that we want to call it quits. There are days that we want to quit on ourselves. There are days when we think there's no way you or anyone can possibly love us, and yet you can remind us every day of just how much we are loved. God, I pray that you help us to rediscover that hope again. Help us to discover that love that you intended for us. And help us to live our lives in such a way that we can bring out the best in one another. We thank you for all this, Lord, in your name.